Okay, so we're almost ready to change the coolant. And before we do that, I thought I would just touch base a little bit on exactly what coolant is, why we use it, and some of the different types that would be available to us. So what is a coolant? So essentially coolant is there to reduce heat in the engine. So around the cylinders in the block and around the cylinder head is a water jacket. It's a continuous passageway that water flows through, and it takes the heat of the working engine and it absorbs the heat into the water and then expels it out through the radiator as heat. Initially, when motor cars were first kind of developed, plain water was used, but engineers realised quite early on water has one major down point: it freezes. Even in the east of England here, where it's quite temperate, the temperatures do drop below freezing, and plain water as a coolant is not going to be ideal. Also, water can corrode, particularly in a cast iron block such as Dotty, can cause corrosion issues as well. If any air is getting in, it can corrode, it can silt up. That corrosion can then kind of silt up the water jacket, reducing the effectiveness of that coolant. So engineers realised quite early on in the technology that by adding chemicals to that water, they could reduce or lower that freezing point down. So one of the first chemicals that was used was glycol, or ethylene glycol, and this reduces the freezing point of water down to somewhere around about -10, -15 degrees, which is plenty for what we need. As cars have evolved, engines have got more powerful, they run hotter. Engineers have kind of modified that kind of chemical compound, and in the early 90s something called OAT coolant was developed, and that stands for organic acid technology. Those kind of coolants typically can be a bright yellow in colour or a bright green. A later evolution, which started to be used from the kind of the early noughties onwards, and particularly by performance manufacturers, is an IAT, an inorganic acid technology coolant. These tend to be used by a lot of European manufacturers. People particularly like the Volkswagen Group, BMW and so on use these coolants. They tend to be red or bright orange in colour to easily distinguish them from the earlier kind of glycol-based or OAT coolants. So what are we using? You can buy coolant either as a ready mixed coolant, which is what I went for because it's easier, or you can buy a concentrated coolant. So a concentrated coolant is diluted normally 50-50 with water. If you're in a country or a climate where you experience lots of cold weather, then you might do a 70-30 mix. It's really important to state that when you're diluting down that coolant, that you shouldn't use tap water. Industry experts recommend using either a distilled or deionized water. In fact, actually, apparently one of the best things to use is rainwater. So if you have a rainwater collecting system, use that. And that's because domestic drinking water has all kinds of salts and chemicals in it, which again can kind of attack the internal surfaces of that water jacket, leading to reduced effectiveness. So I've bought a ready mixed coolant, as I say, and it's ready to pour into the car. And this will do us down to about -23 degrees, which should be good enough for anything we need. So I'm just going to start off by slackening off the hose clamp on the bottom radiator hose. Unfortunately, like many other cars of the period, Dotty doesn't have a radiator drain tap. Open the cap there just to allow the coolant to run out a little bit more. So I think I'm also going to slacken the clamp off on the other radiator bottom hose, see if we can get a bit more water out of this one. Coolant doesn't seem to be coming out very quickly from there. So okay, so refilling is exactly the reverse of draining the system. So we'll pop the hoses back on. refill the coolant. It's just under 5 litres of coolant in a 1500 Midget. Pop a little funnel in there. We'll pour in slowly, allowing time for the air to kind of escape so that we don't get an airlock. So in the first part of the video we carried out a coolant change on Dotty, and I demonstrated how to drain up the old coolant and to refill with new antifreeze coolant. Took Dotty out for a test drive and had a little bit of a disaster. She started overheating, and I realised fairly quickly that basically I'd inadvertently airlocked the cooling system. So we got round the corner, temperature gauge was climbing higher. Normally it's kind of rock steady in the middle of the normal band on the temperature gauge. Started getting hotter, so I pulled over and had a look, and basically when I opened the bonnet, top radiator, top hose here, which goes from the thermostat housing down all the way down under here into the bottom of the radiator, this hose was absolutely red hot. Bottom radiator hoses stone cold. So I realised, yeah, pretty quickly it was an airlock. So I let Dotty cool down. Took about an hour, limped her back home to have a little look at what I'd done. And when I revisited the kind of the Haynes manual on the section on cooling and had a little look online, did a bit of research, it seems that it's very, very easy to airlock the cooling system on these 1500 Midgets, the ones that use the Triumph-based cooling system, principally the cars that have an expansion tank. When I refilled the coolant foolishly, I'd done what I thought I should have done instead of reading what was needed to be done. So just as a little bit of a follow-up to talk through how the cooling system should be refilled. So with the engine nice and cool, as I say, we don't want to be doing this when the engine's hot because the cooling system is under pressurization and you don't want to get scalded with boiling water. So let the engine cool down. Remove the bottom hose, drain the coolant into a suitable receptacle. If we're draining the water jacket from around the engine, then there is a drain plug which is located on the offside of the engine block just behind the exhaust manifold. It's accessible through a hole in the inner wing, which I think I demonstrated earlier on in the video. So we drain the coolant out. It's also possible to drain the coolant out from the heater matrix, but I decided not to do that on this occasion. It seems that we managed to cure the airlock. So we drain out the old coolant, as I say, into a catch container, reattach the hoses. The next thing, this is what I didn't do, the expansion tank is down here. It's in the front offside corner of the engine bay. Now, ideally, the expansion tank needs to be the highest point of the cooling system. As I say, ideally, you'd have the expansion tank kind of up here somewhere. The fact is, it's had to go where it is, which is low down below the scuttle. It's below the top part of the cooling system, which is the thermostat housing on top of the engine here, and that's where the problem lies. So, what the manual explains, the way that you carry out the refilling of the coolant, as I say, with the engine cold. Remove the expansion tank cap. Now I fitted a new one. These do have a pressure release kind of element to them, so I wanted to make sure that was all in good order, that the sealing gasket and so on in there was good, so I replaced that. So I removed the expansion tank cap. The next thing, the little coolant hose which runs from the top of the radiator here down to the expansion tank, which is just off camera there. So there's a hose clamp on there, and what we start by doing is, with a screwdriver, slacken off the screw, pull the stud off the expansion tank, and what we then need to do is we hold this up. This then becomes the highest point of the cooling system, and it allows the air to vent out. So you can tie this up, maybe a bit of string around the bonnet, or as I did, grab an assistant to help you and hold the expansion tank hose up there while you're refilling. So that's the first thing. The next thing to do with an adjustable spanner is to remove this filling plug from the top of the thermostat housing. Be careful because it is a brass into an alloy casting, so don't put too much force on it. We remove the cooling plug like so, and again we'll check the condition of the kind of the sealing rubber underneath and so on, just to make sure that everything's all okay. Then we put the funnel into the top of the thermostat housing out into the expansion tank. We'll refill the coolant from this point, because this is then the highest point with the air escaping out of there. As the coolant goes down, it will circulate through the system. Don't let the hose drop down, otherwise all the coolant comes out. So we'd normally be holding this up and we're filling the coolant back through there. What I found then is you kind of fill it, it's useful, you can kind of almost burp the system. Squeezing the top hoses, you can work the air out of the system. You'll be able to keep filling until the coolant's level with the bottom of the threads in the thermostat housing there. You'll find that the expansion tank at that point is about half full. When you get to that point, simply pop the expansion hose back onto the expansion tank, screw the blast blanking plug back in again. So mostly hand tight. We'll just give it a little nip up with the adjustable. Obviously, all of the bolts fittings on Dotty are imperial, not metric, so it's vitally important for service work like this. You need to make sure that you get hold of an imperial, not a metric, adjustable spanner. So tighten up the coolant there, and the hose clamp on the expansion tank. So that's all screwed back up there. I also take this opportunity just to go around and double check all of the other hose clamps, just to make sure that everything is all nice and tight. Give it all a little nip up like that. Now I'm just going to check now the coolant level in the expansion tank. Apologies, it's just off the camera there, but you're looking for the coolant to be level with the bottom of the filler neck in the expansion tank, which it pretty much is. Yeah, that all looks okay. If it isn't, you can top it up from there. We'll then put the expansion tank cap back on again. A bit awkward buried under the front wing here. But that locks back on nice and securely. I'm just going to check these hose clamps while I'm at it. Just to make sure that we've got everything nipped up there. So with all those tight, then start the engine, give it a good run, make sure that the cooling system's working, that you're getting a good flow of water around the engine, that the car's not overheating, that it's blowing hot air out of the radiator, so we're not getting out of the heater, so that we're not getting an airlock through the heater. Give the car a run, just check that everything's okay, and then generally what I would do is perhaps after a day or two, when the engine's cold again, open the expansion tank, just check the coolant level, just to make sure that everything's okay. Once it's had a good chance to kind of circle around the system, check it's okay, top it up a little bit. So once you've done that, following, as I say, the method that's laid out in the manual, not doing what you think should be done, the cooling system should be changed, or the coolant in the cooling system will be changed, should be running fine with no issues. So we can call that another job ticked off the list.